involvement at the Eco Centre as leaders and volunteers and concerned advocates every year. So I'm pleased to welcome our second introductory speaker tonight, Alyssa Seckinger-Crow, a current school captain at Albert Park College and a keen environmental advocate. She has recently been awarded the Vivian McCutcheon Environment Award for her efforts working with the college and the wider community to bring to fruition a range of initiatives and projects for Australia's first carbon neutral school and district, and serving as the chair of the Sustainability Subcommittee of the School Council. Alyssa is passionate about inspiring other young people to take action in their community and to respond to the climate crisis. Welcome, Alyssa.
Hello, everyone. Tonight, I'll be speaking from my perspective as a young person, facing a world which can seem very frightening to many of us, but where there is hope in the form of action. The first time I learned about climate change at school, I remember learning that apparently we have all the solutions we need to stop the climate crisis. And as a 15-year-old, I couldn't understand why we weren't immediately stopping all coal mining, why millions of trees were still being cut down daily. If we have all the solutions, why not just solve the problem? And then I discovered that the implementation of solutions to climate change mostly fell on the shoulders of the policymakers, and they didn't seem to be doing their job. I was then starting Year 10 and desperately wanted to understand this lack of action. I couldn't help constantly being confronted with our unsustainable society. I was worried about the state of our world was in, and I share this feeling with so many other young people. Some of you may think that climate anxiety sounds a bit extreme, but I know that it certainly is not. I mean, if you really realise what is going on here, how no one has the ability to bring back all of the extinct species with a 68% decline in wildlife populations since 1970, that certainly is a reason to be concerned. A recent global survey on climate anxiety of 16 to 25-year-olds found that 77% said that the future is frightening, and 40% are feeling hesitant to have children. This distress correlates with the belief that climate action from governments is completely inadequate. I found that this inaction has led to a general distrust towards the government in my generation, which certainly isn't good. A trust which can only be rebuilt by our politicians listening to our voices and supporting a world that is run by renewables. So I joined School Strike for Climate to take action, helping organise school strikes and meeting absolutely inspiring young students. And I finally felt that we had something in our control. It is the best feeling to meet and work with others who want to secure a future where the climate crisis can become a thing of the past. But while striking is empowering, I also remember feeling like our voices as young people were falling on deaf ears, especially when we say things that many people don't want to listen to. Right now, I still can't vote, and other young people can't vote either. We can't work to combat the climate crisis professionally. And we watch as we see Australia lag miles behind other countries with their climate policies. At the end of the day, I know that young people are doing their part. It is the politicians, the people who decide if every rooftop in Australia should have solar panels, they that must finally get their act together. And I find that as students, we're there to put the pressure on and also to take action in our own backyard. So at Albert Park College, we have incredible support from our teachers to run campaigns to reduce our school's emissions and waste production. So as environment leader last year, and together with our student environment team, we organised whole school campaigns, which some like the Switch It Off campaign, to educate our peers in forming sustainable habits. And taking these actions definitely gave us students a sense of achievement, of having a little bit of this climate crisis in our control. I currently chair our sustainability subcommittee, so that's 30 members strong, so we have parents, students and teachers working towards one shared goal of becoming a carbon neutral school this year. But for many of us here tonight, you might feel the same way that I do. We can make a difference, yet the structural change must also come from policies on a national scale. I see inspirational young people all around me, but I wish I could see more inspirational adults and politicians not just talking about making a difference, but actually making it happen. Our lives as humans are 100% dependent on nature. But I look at so many parties' election campaigns only to see the environment not being placed as top priority. Instead, it is the economy, our roads, education, welfare. Now, don't get me wrong, I know these are all important and all have their place. But yet, so many of us fall into the trap. While all these aspects of our society are essential for a happy nation, the future of our world is at stake. While you need to put food on the table, you also need air to breathe and forests that aren't burned down by bushfires. Just yesterday, I watched a speech by 12-year-old Alyssa Suzuki at the UN conference in Rio in 1992. And her plea for climate action 30 years ago sounded identical to the one of today's young generation. As I see it, it means one thing. The action of the government needs to be bigger than ever before. Not taking this slow and safe approach, but actually responding to this crisis with the urgency and alarm it deserves. So it is for the politician who will represent the Macnamara electorate to reflect the urgent voices of those of us who see the time ticking down, to rebuild young people's trust in the government so we have a reason to hope for our future.
Thank you, Alyssa. We will now hear from our candidates who are with us this evening. First, I'd like to introduce Josh Burns. I'll read the bios. I'll read your bio. This is Peter speaking on behalf of Colleen Harkin, who is passionate about education and believes that the Liberals' passion for technology, innovation, and economy makes addressing climate issues natural Liberal Party territory.
Just before we get to our candidates, in the absence of any Liberal Party representative tonight, we feel it is important to give Liberal Party policies an airing. The following are selected excerpts, word for word, of published coalition government plans and Liberal policy. And Liberal Party policies. Please note, it's not always clear from the documents whether spending has actually been allocated or whether the spending is future spending. So I'll speak for about 2 minutes. Reducing emissions and energy investment. We are on track to reach the target of net zero emissions by 2050, and we commit to making no changes to our 2030 target toward reaching net zero emissions. At its core, this is about technology, not taxes. A re-elected coalition government will not put in place a mining tax, a carbon tax, or make adverse changes in fuel tax credit arrangements. Our plan to deliver net zero emissions will not shut down coal or gas production or exports. We will continue to export our traditional energy exports for as long as our customers demand them. If we were to withdraw supply and reduce our exports, other countries will fill the gap in supply. Australia's coal and gas export industries will continue through to 2050 and beyond, supporting jobs and regional communities. This decade, the government will invest more than $22 billion in low emissions technology technologies, including carbon capture and storage, clean hydrogen, energy storage, ultra-low-cost solar and soil carbon sequestration. We are making targeted investments in transmission projects to support new renewables coming online, including investing a further 84 million in microgrids for remote communities. We will continue to support the Australian gas industry with investments in planning and early stage development of gas projects in strategic basins. The government is investing up to $600 million building a new gas-fired power station in the Hunter Valley. A re-elected coalition government will invest $300 million to unlock gas supply in 3 strategic gas basins, Beetaloo, North Bowen and the Galilee Basin, and Cooper Adavale Basin, and accelerate their development. Invest more than $108 million to deliver on our gas-fired recovery, including support for critical gas infrastructure projects. Last of all, regulations. We will continue to streamline environmental and planning approval processes, reduce green tape while maintaining high environmental standards. We support sensible reforms that reduce regulatory barriers, get major projects up and running sooner.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now to introduce the bios briefly of our candidates who are with us tonight. Firstly, Josh Burns, federal member from Macnamara, who was elected in 2019. Born and raised in Caulfield, Josh has been a local his entire life. As the grandson of migrants who left Europe and settled in Melbourne in search of a safe place to raise their families, Josh knows the importance of upholding a multicultural and multi-faith Australia, and the profound role education can play in changing lives. Before representing our community in Parliament, Josh previously worked as a teacher's aide in a factory and served as an advisor in state and federal governments. Over the past 3 years, Josh has been an active presence in our community, visiting businesses, locals, and community services. Josh has been an advocate in Parliament for progressive change and is deeply committed to reconciliation with our First Australians in line with the Uluru Statement for the Heart. Steph Hodgins-May is a local mum trained in environmental law. She worked in the Australian mission to the United Nations and recently served as Greenpeace head of Pacific. In this position, she pushed for Australia to do more to prevent climate change and to help the Pacific Islands with the challenges that climate change causes. Steph has taken a strong stance on climate policy and has called on successive governments to do more. Steph is focused on the long-term changes we need. She wants to protect what is great about our community and make our society fair, livable, and affordable. We flipped a coin prior to this evening, and Steph will present first with a 8-minute statement, followed by Josh. Welcome, Steph.
Good evening, everyone. I too would like to begin by acknowledging the Yalka Willam of the Boonwurrung and paying my deep respects to their elders, past, present, and any First Nations people here this evening. I'd also like to acknowledge that First Nations' connection to land, to our Port Phillip Bay, and to culture remains strong, and that we are on unceded land and we can and must continue to fight for justice for our First Nations people, who in many times are or bear the brunt of climate impacts. I'd also like to thank the organisers of tonight's event, who do a huge amount of advocacy for our local environment and for our climate more broadly, and also our wonderful guest speakers, Kathryn, Alyssa and April, for lending your expertise to tonight's discussion. And finally to Josh, this is our second debate of many this election campaign, and I look forward to a robust contest of ideas this evening. For those of you who don't know me, my background is as an environmental lawyer. I'm a parent to a young child, and I grew up in country Victoria, where we were acutely aware of the impacts of not acting on the climate crisis. I've seen bushfires, I've seen floods, and I've seen droughts, and I've seen what happens when governments fail to act on science. My life, my professional career has been dedicated to confronting the climate crisis, which for me is the existential crisis that we face as a society. And I also want to touch on why this seat is so incredibly important. It's the Greens' closest federal seat in the nation, and could be the difference between having Greens in shared power after the next election, pushing for the climate action we need, pushing to phase out of coal and gas this decade as the science demands. And you have my word that if I am in that parliament, I will vote with, as I say I will, every single time I'm given the chance. So the question I've been asked to address tonight are what are the current climate change and energy issues and what needs to be done by the federal parliament. This election, I'd like you to consider how we've reached this point of climate crisis, because yes, it is here, and the role of the federal government. There are two major factors that have gotten us to this point. Firstly, the fossil fuel industry has bought politics and politicians to protect their profits. This industry has denied climate change. They've thrown out fake solutions, such as we just heard the Libs' carbon capture storage policies. And they've pushed personal responsibility onto individuals to deflect from the real cause, the burning of coal, gas and oil. Coal and gas companies have given the major parties $11.9 million in the last decade in fossil fuel donations. And why do they do it? To slow down action on climate and protect the $98 billion in fossil fuel subsidies they've attracted in the last decade. The second reason is political cowardice. And I'm going to focus tonight on the ALP because the ALP is simply not here and a simply lost cause. The Labor Party has not and will not address the need to get off coal and gas. Their climate targets have gone backwards since the last election, despite what we heard the IPCC is warning us of. And according to the historically conservative International Energy Agency, we can't open any new coal and gas projects. Yet Labor and Liberal have approved 114 new coal and gas projects. Labor has voted for $50 million in public money to go to coal and gas corporations as subsidies. And Labor has voted to support drilling the Beetaloo Basin, described as a carbon bomb, which will release more emissions than the nation of Bulgaria releases in a year. I understand why they do it. They're scared of the LNP attack ads, but I don't respect why they do it. Because it is the job of politicians to lead the way, to tell the truth, and to follow the science, even when it isn't convenient. So what should the next federal parliament be doing? We must put an end to fossil fuel donations, plain and simple, and we must stop the revolving door of politicians leaving and going and working in cushy lobbying jobs for the fossil fuel industry. And we must tell the truth and act like there is an emergency, because there is. We need to get out of coal and gas, full stop. And yes, I acknowledge it will be difficult, and it will require the mobilisation of resources that we haven't seen in this country. But we can and must do it. And finally, we must act on the science, and I want to touch briefly on our fully costed plan to do that. The Greens' target is a 75% reduction on 2005 levels by 2030 and for net zero emissions by 2035. The three main pillars of our plan include getting out of coal and gas, building renewables to replace it, and exporting clean energy. To get there, to phase out coal and gas, we'll introduce a moratorium on all new coal, oil and gas projects in line with the International Energy Agency, and put a levy on coal mining to fund the transition as coal exports are phased out by 2030. We'll support coal workers with a job-for-job guarantee. We'll guarantee their wages for 10 years with their employer receiving a wage subsidy, because we recognise that they have helped build this country and they shouldn't be punished. They need a plan. And we will end the subsidies of the $98.4 billion over a decade to fund the jobs of the future, which we know exist. Yeah. We will build renewables to replace this infrastructure, including the Snowy Hydro 3.0, which will act as a not-for-profit, renewables-only generator and retailer to replace the current reliance on coal. And we'll export clean energy. Wind and solar can be turned into emissions-free hydrogen and exported overseas as bottled sunshine and wind. In concluding, I'm going to say that climate change isn't something in the future, it's upon us now. And the longer we leave confronting this reality, the more costly, irreversible and unstoppable it will be. We need to kick the Morrison government out. But a Labor government on its own, But the Labor government on its own simply will not do what is necessary to stop mining and burning coal and gas that is driving the climate emergency. Both parties are captured by the influence of donations, the donations of the coal, oil and gas company. Both major parties claim their policies will keep coal power stations open longer. They pledge that more renewables won't lead to less coal, but less coal is exactly what we need. So this election, I urge you not to be distracted by a solar battery here or a grant there. Taking climate action in line with the science will require transformative action of an enormous scale, and it also requires a plan to phase out coal and gas immediately. I was a volunteer firefighter for a time on the front lines of the climate crisis. On January 2014, I spent 21 hours on a truck, desperately trying to reduce fuel load and contain a fire that jumped our vehicle and was raging quickly out of control. That is what we need to do to stop fueling the climate crisis. We need to start building the economy of the future, ignore the billionaires and the donors, and start listening to the people and the scientists who say the time to act is right now. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Oh, this thing's a little bit ruddy. Got a really big microphone. Good evening, everyone. I too will acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we gather, the Boonwurrung people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Whoever you vote for in this election, whoever you vote for, I hope that we can all be united if we are sending our country to a referendum to recognise the 65,000 years of history of this nation. If we are elected, we will put this country into our referendum to recognise and institutionalise Indigenous voices in this country. Australia's first people have had a lasting connection to the land and to the water, and they should be at the table, not from a position of weakness, but from a position of institutional strength. That is what the voice is all about. That is why we must enshrine it in our Constitution. And that is why the request of the Uluru Statement from the Heart is one that whoever you support this election, I would urge you to please embrace it and to do your bit when our country finally decides upon that in the future. To the organisers of PECAN, many of whom have been in my office many times over the past 3 years, to our special guest speakers, Kathryn and Alyssa, who are both very impressive and hard acts that followed. To Steph, it's very good to see that you're back with a full bill of health, and annoyingly, you are still a very good candidate. And we will have a great debate tonight, I'm sure. I'm glad to see you back on the campaign trail. Friends, we need to get moving. We need to get cracking. It has been privilege of my working life to be the representative of our community. It's something I take extremely seriously, and it's something that, to be given that opportunity by the community and by the people of Macnamara, I am and have been eternally grateful for. And then for the past 3 years, I have tried to work as hard as I possibly can to represent the wonderful people of our local community. I have stood in the federal parliament, and I have spoken on the debate where Angus Taylor tried to dismantle the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, to turn it into a corporation that didn't invest in clean energy and that didn't bother to work about the finances of the things it was investing in, which is pretty silly given it's called the Clean Energy Finance Corporation. I stood in the federal parliament when Angus Taylor tried to dismantle Australia's Renewable Energy Agency. I stood in the federal parliament when Angus Taylor said that if the private market does not build a gas-fired peaking plant, then he will build one himself. Each and every time I've stood against it, and I've been a voice for climate action, and I will continue to be a voice if I have the privilege of being the representative of our electorate. Scott Morrison's emission reduction target is 26 to 28%. That's what we're battling against. We need to kick this bloke out. And I remember at the last election, we kind of all came into this room and we had this amazing discussion and we had this assumption that we were going to win, that Labor was going to win this election. And it was just the most devastating night for so many reasons when Morrison said it was the miracle and he always believed in miracles. Don't wake up on the 22nd of May. Don't wake up on the 22nd of May wishing you'd done something different. Don't wake up and let them continue with their nonsense around the gaslit recovery. Give us an opportunity to govern this country. Please. Don't let these people stay in government. Give us an opportunity to reach for something better. What will Labor do if we have the privilege of governing this country? We've done the work. We've done the homework. We've costed it. We've modelled it independently by Reputex. We're going to create 600,000 jobs, 5 of every 6 in the regions of this great country. Joe Biden, when he was running for president, he said climate change equals jobs, good union jobs. We've won the moral argument. The science is clear. We need to win the economic argument as well. We need to bring the country with us. We have to unite the country, from Macnamara to Macquarie, from Higgins to the Hunter Valley. We need to bring people with us, or we will wake up and this bloke will still be in charge. We need, and Labor's policy is to get to at least 83% renewable energy by 2030. We're going to create 85 solar banks around the country, 400 community batteries. Electric vehicles are going to be made cheaper because we're going to reduce tariffs and taxes on them. We're also going to use government fleets to purchase more EVs in the market. Friends, one of the key differences between us and the coalition is that Barnaby Joyce, even in the last 24 hours, for goodness sake, his candidate for Flynn is talking about the wiggle room when it comes to our net zero emissions. We're going to legislate it. It's going to be the law that this country will have to lower our emissions. It's going to be the law. We're going to introduce a Climate Change Act in the federal parliament to get going, so that any project, any new project that is put forward in this country must fit within a framework of Australia lowering our emissions. The final thing I want to mention to you, and I'm sure there'll be heaps of other examples, is that we have seen a government that has turned Australia into a laggard on climate action. They brought Santos and their carbon capture and storage to Glasgow for crying out loud. We want to host the COP in Australia. We want Chris Bowen as the Minister for Emission Reduction to be at the forefront of Australia's efforts to not just transform Australia, but to transform the world. We want Anthony Albanese as the Prime Minister of this country to lead efforts, and we're going to do it in partnership with our Pacific nations. If you want to return Australia to the leadership role that we should be playing on climate, because of the huge economic opportunity that we can grasp, then please give us an opportunity. Don't take a seat off the Labor Party. Like Scott Morrison will be thinking, what would his ideal outcome be for Macnamara? That is to take the seat off the Labor Party. It's just one less seat that the coalition have to win. So I say to you tonight, hold us to account. Give us an opportunity to form government in this country. We can't afford another 3 years. What we're asking to do is unprecedented. In the years of the Rudd-Gillard government, we reduced our emissions by just over 11%. What we're asking is something in around 3 times that. It's literally never been done in this country in the 8 years we've got to go till the end of 2030. We've got a lot of work to do. I hope you'll give us a chance. I really appreciate you all being here tonight, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thanks very much.
We have about 35 minutes now for questions coming from the audience to our candidates. We're all here because we care. Let's ask our questions that we care about extremely deeply in the context of an existential crisis. but with kindness directed, short, sharp, and sweet, in the form of a question. Our questions tonight will have 3 sources. There are those that we received in advance and that volunteers have condensed into questions, which I can ask on behalf of all of you submitted in advance. Those of you who are here on the floor, you may ask questions by queuing next to our volunteers with microphones on the 2 edges. Please don't block the live stream video. And I may call on you to ask the question of our candidates. And lastly, for those of you who are following along from the comfort of the live stream, you may ask questions in the chat. We have a representative here in the room who's monitoring that, and I will call on them periodically to ask some of the questions on behalf of everyone in the live stream. Candidates, you'll have 2 minutes to respond and write a rebuttal where appropriate. We have a 1-minute notice by a timekeeper in the front row. And once you pass time, I will transition you to the next question or respondent. So I'd like to open up first by asking, the current government has put forward a net zero emissions target for Australia by 2050 and are planning to reach it. This question is for both candidates. Does your party believe this target is adequate to address the climate crisis, and how specifically would your party's approach vary from this target and this plan? Just to take turns, yes, starting with Steph.
Yes, hello? Yes. Absolutely inadequate. And the IPCC report and the scientific community has told us that it's inadequate. As is latest 43% emissions reduction by 2030, completely inadequate and not backed by the science. As I said in my opening remarks, our goal is for 75% emissions reduction by 2030 and 100% by 2035, which is what the science demands if we are to escape this climate crisis.
Hello. Thank you for the question, April. No, it's not, and there's no point in even having targets if you're going to just keep people in the round and not hold yourself to them. These people have systematically, over the period of government, tried to undermine the very institutions that have been reducing our emissions as a country. We need to get Angus Taylor's hands and Barnaby Joyce's hands and Scott Morrison's hands off the levers of government. We need to transition towards renewables. We need to transform our transport industry, our agriculture industry, our heavy emitters. We have to bring their emissions down. And the only way we do that is by enforcing it through legislation. So knowing their targets are inadequate, and we need to strengthen the institutions of government to enforce it as well.
Thank you. I'd like to call for a question from the right.
My name is Peter, and I'm the teacher.
Wait, one moment, Peter. We'll just make sure that your microphone's on. Can you say your name again?
Peter.
Try one more time.
Peter.
Thank you. It's definitely Peter. We just asked to take that. Can I have could you test on your microphone as well? Yeah, so,
Hello?
all right, thanks. Thank you. We'll return to our regularly scheduled broadcast. Peter.
I'm going to ask a very simple question, because we all know the science, we all know the dire consequences of failing to act. I'm going to support a party that declares a national climate emergency, and I want to know from each of the candidates what their response is to that.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you for your question, Peter. I seconded a motion in the House of Representatives that was moved by Chris Bowen at that stage, who was our climate spokesperson. Sorry, it was actually moved by Mark Butler, who was our climate spokesperson. It was a motion that was declaring a climate emergency and was shut down by the Morrison government. It absolutely is an emergency. I seconded the motion in the House of Representatives. If you really starved for entertainment, I can send you the speech, but we absolutely need to declare an emergency and set the policies accordingly. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you, Peter. And of course, the Greens support that National Climate Emergency Declaration, but we also just support the action that needs to underpin it. And that is not opening 130 coal mines. It is not declaring that you will never introduce a price on carbon when that is the only thing that's worked in Australia's history to reduce emissions. And that's exactly what Anthony Albanese did this week. And it's not supporting new coal fields, it's not supporting offshore gases at the Scarborough gas project, which has been led by the Labor government, where we're seeing an increase in emissions in WA. And it's not supporting fracking in the Northern Territory. It's not supporting Labor supporting offshore exploration of our pristine coastlines of Victoria. If you're supporting those things, you cannot truly tell me that you are supporting and saying that there is a climate emergency and that you think that we need to take action, because that is the most important action to take right here today.
Thank you. Question from the floor.
My name is Alan Fuss. I'm a member of the Iceberg families, but I'm Josh Burns and Steph. We have the internet. If we have an increase of temperature by about 1 Celsius every 20 years, you could be having flooding coming up from Port Phillip Lake with flood areas like Aspenvale, Elwood, St Kilda, up to the corner of Brighton Road, St Kilda Road, up near St Kilda Road. So you think the solution would be solar power, thermal power, wind power? What do you think the solution is?
Thanks. Question, what would the solution be to avert the combination of storms and sea level rise that will flood many local suburbs?
Well, to reiterate, the leading cause of climate change is the burning of coal and gas. So unless we stop burning those things, and unless we stop exporting those mammoth amounts of coal that Australia is exporting, these flood events are going to become increasingly more prevalent. And Kathryn touched upon this, the health impacts, as well as the inundation of our beautiful city of Port Phillip area, are becoming increasingly acute already. Hospitalisations, rising anxiety amongst our young people about the impacts of the climate crisis. I just really want to reiterate that we want to keep below 1.5 degrees of warming. And we're hearing that that might not be possible and that we might overshoot to 2 degrees. But there is a huge gap between 1.5 and 2 degrees of warming. Every point of a degree of warming is going to be calculated in lives lost and in livelihoods lost, including here in Port Phillip. So I just really want you to think about that. It's not 1.5 or 2. We need to keep as close to 1.5 degrees as we possibly can. So phasing out of coal, oil and gas, and then transitioning to a fully electric grid. And that does involve, as I think Alyssa said, solar panels on every single roof and university and school across this country. It involves creating new markets for green hydrogen exports, creating new jobs in new industries in the renewable energy sector, and including manufacturing EVs here in Australia, where we could be leaders in the manufacturing industry of electric vehicles. Shortly, but great question. Thanks.
Thanks for your question. Where's Adam? Thanks for your question, Adam. Absolutely right. Elwood is a flood zone already, and with a high tide over January, Elwood would have gone under. Port Melbourne is already a suburb designated for coastal erosion and is at risk of flooding from the bay. We are at the forefront of climate change in our local community, but of course in Australia we're seeing Lismore potentially being one of the first towns that might have to partially relocate as a result of climate change. So what is the Labor government going to do, and how are we going to use the levers of government? We're not supporting new coal and gas projects. We haven't outlined a single cent of funding commitments to any new coal or gas projects. What we're going to do is fund renewable energy. We're going to rebuild the national electricity grid. We're going to build solar banks around the country. We're going to implement community batteries, including one in South Bank, so that communities can access renewable energy. If you can't put one on your roof, then you should still be able to access clean and cheap energy. We want to electrify things. We want to get electric vehicles into the grid. There is a whole lot of work. And it's easy to throw away this line to say that it's not enough, right? That's an easy thing to do. What we have to do as a party of government is actually try and deliver it. That's why we costed it and modelled that policy. It's a really good question, and thanks very much.
A direct response from Steph.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that, respond to a comment that you haven't supported any new coal or gas mines. field. If there was an Albanese government after the election, you've got legislative power to stop the existing projects that are happening, such as the Beetaloo gas bomb, such as the Scarborough project, such as the offshore exploration of our pristine waterways. Do you commit to Labor doing that, to stop those new coal and gas projects?
So let's talk about Beetaloo, right? The Pepper inquiry made some key recommendations. The way that the Labor government would only, what our policy has been was yes, and I know the Labor Party supported the exploration grants, but that's not the Beetaloo Basin. That's not going to get the whole thing off the ground. What was said, and I accept it, but I don't accept it. What was said is that every recommendation of the Pepper inquiry needs to be adhered to. Two of the key recommendations, one is around First Nations voices. And at the moment, Ballantyre McCarthy, who's our Senator from Northern Territory, Pat Dodson, the father of reconciliation, our candidate in Lingiari, Marilyn Scrooger, have all been clear about the fact that our First Nations voices have not yet been properly consulted and adhered to as part of that process. So that's one thing that's in the way of this going ahead. The second thing in the way of Beetaloo going ahead is that it has to be net zero, because we're going to legislate for our country to reduce our emissions. If it's not net zero, it's not going to go ahead. So everything, all new projects are going to have to fit within the framework of a legislated Climate Change Act. That is going to be the law. There is no wiggle room. It is going to be the law. And if you want that to be the law, we need a Labor government to write the law, not worry about how we're going to vote for Scott Morrison's wedge legislation that he keeps putting before the Parliament. Like, it's ridiculous that this guy's just constantly trying to look for ways to poke us in the eye. What we want to do is write the law to start bringing this country down towards net zero and to stop having this conversation over and over about each and every project.
Thanks very much. Now we have a question coming from our live stream audience, going to be read to us from a volunteer.
Paraphrase. I've got a question from Meredith Gilbert from the live stream. She asked, and this is going to be a really quick question after that last one. Will each of your parties put a moratorium on new fossil fuel, exploration, new fossil fuel production in Australia? That's the question.
The answer to the question, what was the name of the person online? Meredith online. The answer to the question is that we are going to legislate towards net zero, and that all projects would have to fall within that framework. That's I can't make up our policy. That's going to be our policy. In terms of using and subsidising new coal and gas, no, we're going to subsidise renewable energy. That's going to be our policy. We're going to subsidise and try and get our country towards net zero as quickly as possible.
Yes, Adam Bandt has been very public in noting that we will be seeking a moratorium on all coal and gas projects. He outlined this as one of the areas that we would be seeking to work quite closely with an Albanese government on. You may be aware that we had a very successful power sharing agreement in 2010 between the Greens and the Labor Party. During that time, we established ARENA and the Clean Energy Finance Corporation. During that time, we got a price on carbon and became leaders in tackling the climate crisis. Yet Anthony Albanese is going out in the media saying he will not work with the Greens and he will not even speak to us about a moratorium on coal and gas. So no, they won't, and I think this talk of if it falls within net zero, it won't be applicable. Well, I can tell you those projects won't. As I said, the emissions, the same amount of emissions as Belgium for a year, or Bulgaria for a year. It's simply not possible. And I thought I'd seen Anthony Albanese in the last week say that coal and gas projects are going to be quite separate from the net zero target. Are you sure that they're not?
Yes, and all emissions in Australia will be falling under the legislative framework that we provide. We're going to strengthen and boost the Climate Change Authority, another institution that was created in that era that has been gutted by these people. That institution is going to be giving advice to Chris Bowen. Bowen will be presenting our emission reduction plans, our targets, our work to the Parliament each and every year. The closing the gap, unfortunately, hasn't been as successful as I want, but that process of being accountable to the Parliament each and every year is something that we're going to implement as a Labor government. So, like we can come back here in 3 years and talk about, what's Barnaby done now, or you can see how we deliver this in government, and you can see how we implement the legislative framework and the legislative rules and requirements to move ourselves towards net zero. That's what's on the table. That's what I'm passionate about, and I really hope we get a chance to do it.
Thank you, Josh. I do have one, yeah, you can clap, that's all right.
I think that's my mum.
I have a follow-up question that was submitted in advance of the forum. This is addressed for Steph. The Greens Climate Plan does call very clearly for an immediate ban on new oil, coal, and gas projects. At the same time, it plans to introduce a broader petroleum resource rent tax to raise $92 billion over the next decade, and a mining super profit tax to raise $124 billion over the same period. So the question is, how could these revenues be raised if new projects are banned?
Thank you. What was the question from?
It's an amalgamation of pre-submitted questions.
Yeah, so we're not saying we're going to close all coal-fired power stations overnight. We've got a phased timeline. Every single coal-fired power station in this country on our website, and go through it with you after the session if you'd like more information. But what we're saying is it needs to be an orderly transition. We need to have a plan for these coal workers who have spent their lives and the parents before them working in these coal mines, impacting their health every single day. And that's what they're saying. What they're saying to Alan Banton, to our representatives up in Queensland is, we might not like everything you say, but we know that the writing is on the wall. And we're thankful that you're here talking about a transition and considering a transition, rather than lying to us and saying that these coal mines are going to be around for much, much longer than we know the market is dictating. They see the writing on the wall, and that's why we've developed this plan. And the Greens aren't saying banning all mining, it's coal, oil and gas, because we simply must. They're the leading causes of climate change. So it's not an overnight phenomenon. And our fully costed plan, which will be fully launched this week, really maps out exactly where the money comes from and exactly where the jobs will be created. And I touched on some of them before. The electric vehicle revolution can and should be led from Australia.
So we'll leave it at that. I'm just mindful we've got a lot of people standing. I wanted to say for those on the floor, if you're just waiting for a question, do feel free to sit in the seats, and you'll understand that you're queuing for the question. And this person came in over here. Introduce yourself and ask a question to our candidates. We're going to do our magic then. You have to lick the battery. Yeah, there we go. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question addressed to both candidates. We've talked a lot about litigation tonight, but something that the IPCC report has really emphasised is the need for adaptation and the need for adaptation now. And so I want to know, what is your response to that question? How would your parties seek to adapt Australia to a future that is looking more and more inevitable?
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Alex. So, Josh first.
It's a really good question, and unfortunately, Alex, it is going to be part of what we're going to need to do in this country. We have a range of projects, including millions of dollars funding for the Great Barrier Reef and other projects to try and slow down the inevitable dredging of the Great Barrier Reef. It's a part of our solution, and I'm happy to send through more details about what we're going to do. One of the big things that we do need to do is around environmental protections. The federal government went through the process of reviewing the EPCC Act. I'm sure you probably know this, Alex, but I'm the benefit of anyone else who doesn't. The federal government went through the process of reviewing the EPCC Act. They got
Environmental protection,
biodiversity, conservation, and Professor Graham Samuels came back with some really good recommendations. Things like, we need stronger federal environmental protections. We need a federal environmental watchdog to actually implement those protections. And what did Susan Lee do? She brought in 2 pieces of legislation that basically removed the federal government from any federal environmental protection standards. What happened was the Labor and the crossbench, including the Greens, stood up against it and defeated that legislation twice. We need, and our policy will be, to strengthen environmental protections in this country, to introduce and implement a federal environmental protection agency, a watchdog, and to preserve habitat and to look after our environment as we should have done in the first place, but unfortunately people in charge are different. Thanks, Alex.
Yeah, terrific question. I think one of the priorities of the Greens is to really truly fund the local groups that know exactly what sort of adaptation methods need to be implemented, including places like the Eco Centre. You know, it brings a wealth of knowledge on what we need to do in terms of some of the protection of our coastal waterways and how we can be building resilience to those climate events. Investing in biodiversity is another really big one that we need to concentrate on. And I think really strong in our platform is listening to First Nations people on what has worked historically and what can and should work in the future of building up resilience, and including investing much more in Indigenous rangers who are working on adaptation but also teaching us so much about land conservation, protection and building resilience as the climate crisis unfolds. But I just want to stress that we can and must be mitigating emissions simultaneously, and the government's focus on adaptation. You know, I work with frontline Pacific Island communities I'm talking to them regularly and they're saying all of this talk about security, when the number one risk for us is climate insecurity. You know, thousands of Pacific Island communities and people are going to be forced to move off their homelands, even to new islands. And for them, it's beyond adaptation. It's the time for action, and they're demanding it of both major parties, and they know. And I know that they would love for us to hold a COP here, but much more important than us holding a COP is us using science-backed emissions reductions targets to keep warming under 1.5 degrees.
Question.
This is a question for Josh. The ARP policies highlights 24 different policies and themes, but climate action, crisis, and justice, which is an overarching and systemic interconnected issue across country, because everything's not mentioned at all. So I just want to know why is that, and does Labour actually have a detailed whole of government climate plan that's consistent, coherent, and aligned across all areas of environmental, economic, health, and social policy to genuinely address our climate crisis, not in all the things that happen for once in a while.
Thank you. Ewan likes to tweet me occasionally, and thanks for the question. We do, and it's called the Powering Australia Plan. Excuse the corny title, but it's here. It's part of the work that we did in collaboration with Reputex to cost model and outline our policies, to create and unlock private investment. Not all of this has to be done by government. There is a lot of capital desperate to get involved in renewable energy, to create over 600,000 jobs, 5 of every 6 in the regions. All the policies I've outlined before around solar farms, community batteries, EVs, etc. So yes, we have it, it's available. You just need to look at Powering Australia. It's a bit dense, but I definitely would encourage anyone to have a look at it. Thanks for the question.
Can I? Does it include phasing out coal and gas? Does it mention coal and gas as part of this Powering Australia?
For sure. So, Powering Australia plan is about what we're going to build, what we're going to transfer our economy towards. We're not going to be building new coal-fired power. The Greens have an exemption in their plans for not for thermal coal, but for coking coal as part of their exports. Right? Like so, and Steph said it's about how fast, and I agree with her. It is about how fast we transition our economy. Like, we can't turn off the lights at the moment because in the moment in this room, in Victoria, we are powered by over 60% coal, and we need to transition away from that. And I'm telling you, in this room, that a Labor government will transition our energy grid from fossil fuels to renewables. That is what we are going to invest in. We are going to pull the levers of government to get this done. And I can say it 1,000 times. This is what I'm passionate about. This is what I want to see. It's what I want to help deliver in government. And I hope we get a chance to deliver it.
Build on Will's question with another question that was submitted in advance in regards to the just transition, which you've both spoken to, in regards to what Professor Bowen and Kathryn spoke to beforehand. How will your parties ensure that the focus of a just transition is not just on traditional men's jobs or hard hat jobs, but addressing those in paid and unpaid caring roles, which are held mostly by women and other communities that may be starting out from an unequal playing field of risk? How will your party ensure that the focus of a just transition is not just on traditional men's roles, but paid and unpaid caring roles and other impacts on women, such as increase of domestic violence during extreme weather? Can you please speak to how you see an inclusive just transition and how you bring that about? Steph, can start first.
Yeah, such a terrific question, and we have launched a standalone economic security for women plan that I think can be read very closely in conjunction with our climate plan, for the cost of climate plan as well. And that does invest in women's business. It invests in training women for the jobs of the future through free university and TAFE. It includes massively funding domestic violence services and also providing free childcare. You know, like why have we got free primary and secondary school but not early learning? There are a number of things in our economic security for women plan, but I would say also that these opportunities, this wage guarantee that we want to provide to transition coal workers can and would apply to the women working in these areas and these industries as well. But I think first and foremost we do need to level the playing field, and to do that we need more women at the table, not taking their notes from men, but actually being involved in developing the policies that we need to bring about greater economic security for women right across this country.
Excellent question, April. So I'm going to try and cover a few things, and not all of them relate directly to the climate change forum we're in right now, but that makes them no less important, and we need to get started now because these issues don't just relate to the just transition, they relate to society right now. The first is housing. We are going to fund the construction of thousands and thousands of housing, social housing homes, including thousands of homes for women and children, especially who are fleeing family and domestic violence. They are overwhelmingly the people who are being turned away from respite centres in society today. We need to lift people's wages. The heroes of the pandemic were our childcare workers, our aged care workers. They deserve a pay rise. They deserve a government who's got their back in this country. And it's not just in hospitality and construction and many of the other industries. It's in right across our economy. Our economy is becoming increasingly casualised. We are going to legislate and update the Fair Work Act so we have pathways to permanent secure work. We want people working in secure jobs getting the entitlements that they deserve. Entitlements that they deserve and pathways to secure work. That shouldn't wait till we're talking about a just transition. All of that work needs to happen right across the economy. I know tonight's about climate, and I'm happy to talk about this at any stage with anyone, but we have a lot of work to do to close the gender pay gap. We have a full suite of policies, and I hope we get a chance to improve the lives and the working conditions and the security of work for women in this country.
Get tested, otherwise I don't want to repeat my name 3 times.
I know your name.
Hello.
My name is Kathryn. I wanted to take the issues slightly to one side and to ask the candidates about what their views are about how we can create a cooler, greener city, especially in the city of Port Phillip and Macnamara more broadly. East of Brighton Road, as we all know, we have a huge deficiency of open space, and in most areas around 5%. I know that already both the federal government, existing federal government, and also Josh has named a particular project in Elstwood Park.
Just have to come up. Well, we'll just bring another microphone to you for you to finish, to come to the point of the question. Yep. So your question on a cooler greener city.
My question is, first of all, congratulations for supporting Elsa Park. This is going to be a wonderful nature reserve. But secondly, to ask you whether or not what your feeling is about the Green Line, which has been proposed by a number of community groups up and down Macnamara and extends from Brighton at the railway station up to the river along the railway track.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks. Good local issue. Greener, cooler city, and specifically projects like the Green Line, proposed Green Line of open space, I believe is Steph's first concerns.
Yeah, a local environmental champion, Alan, thank you. Yeah, look, we are very supportive of the Green Line project, and we have a funding commitment that we are going to make. I was hoping to have made it before tonight's event, but I know that we're in touch with Justin around the particulars of that commitment, because we know how much the heat island effect is going to impact us into the future, and if we don't green our cities, we're just going to roast, simply put. Also, I went for a walk recently with Emma from Gardening throughout South Melbourne, and see the extraordinary work that she and her group are doing, revegetating and introducing increased patches of biodiversity in this area. So we will be supporting the Gardening project and the Melbourne pollination corridor as well, which we need more bees as well. You know, these green spaces reduce the heat and the temperatures in our cities. They attract desperately needed wildlife and insects and flora and fauna, and they keep things beautiful as well. Let's not recognise that. Finally, I'd like to say that we are also supporting the development of a huge parkland in South Bank, where they have a minuscule green space and an increasing number of high-rise developments with a decreasing amount of open green space. So we'll be making that announcement through the South Bank News, and we're also matching latest commitments at Elstone Park, because we recognise what a wonderful project that is.
Helen, where are you? Oh, there you are. Well, Helen, thank you for the question. We also need to change the behaviours of people and how they move around the city. We need more people either walking or riding their bike or on public transport or in electric vehicles. They're some of the really important transitional arrangements we need, so the way our people move around our cities is really, it changes, because I still have a fuel combustible vehicle. I hope it's the last one I have, but we need to do that at a grand scale. The Green Line is a really good proposal. I've just got the updated copy, and I'm keen to talk more about it, and maybe a group can come and have a chat about it. But I will obviously emphasise the Elstone Nature Reserve. This is the biggest piece of land given back to the environment in Melbourne's history. It's in Elwood, and it's an amazing piece of land that is connecting wetlands. There are frogs and birds that have been there that have never had a safe home before, and now have a sanctuary. The City of Bayside have done a remarkable job on this project. We need to have their back. We've committed $11.7 million to not only upgrade the park, to help the state government with some flood mitigation works, so that Elwood doesn't end up in underwater, but also along the Elstone Creek. That's basically one of those old aqueducts that is sort of running dirty, contaminated water into the bay. And as part of our urban river policy, we want to try and clean up the water that's travelling into the Port Phillip Bay. It will be better for our wildlife in the bay, it will be better for our fisheries, and I'm hopeful we get a chance to deliver it if we form government. And thanks again for your question. All happy to see you.
We're nearing the end of our allocated time for Q&A. We've talked about emissions, about fossil fuels, just transition. We've just touched on biodiversity, city greening, environmental vehicles, the interrelation of justice and other intersection with other challenges and health, and some comments on Indigenous communities and their involvement and partnership in upholding character for our country. The candidates have agreed to stay for a while after the forum to talk to you, and there are additional forums in our area in the coming weeks. But if you are someone who's been waiting with a question and you feel that you have something that has not yet been represented, then we welcome 2 more questions.
Goodness, that's a close one. I think we could all, Eleanor from the Jewish Parliament, I'm very lucky to be here with you. I think we can all agree that this election outcome is very, very important, and the next 3 years of whoever forms government and what they can achieve is very, very important. I'm interested in hearing about what happens after that, and we all know that Australia loves to switch it up and change parties when they've had enough. Even though climate rising is a major issue, it's entirely possible that the coalition will be in power for at least 3 of the 8 years that we have left to avert very bad things. So I'd love to know what you see your role as individuals and as parties in supporting lasting bipartisanship, doing the things we sometimes don't want to do, not just win, but maybe work together.
Thanks very much, Eleanor. Thanks in charge.
Thank you, Eleanor. And I agree. So I joined the cross-party parliamentary group on climate action. It was with Zali, Stegall, and Helen Haynes, and Rebecca Sharkey. And I really started my parliamentary term trying to reach out to other parties and to the Liberal Party, to the crossbench, to try and get more happening. It was a bit of a schmozzle, and we didn't really get what we needed to do, and it was a bit frustrating. But you're 100% right. Like politics matters, and we have to get a mandate to win. Otherwise, we don't get to do any of the things we want to do. But it also, I would love for this not to be a partisan issue. I would love for the coalition to have a sense of duty, like what they do, frankly, in New South Wales. I think Matt Keane has been a voice of reason in this country and has helped steer his party towards a far more amiable position on climate. So, I would work with whoever, but I really think now that the people in charge, Morrison's had 9 years, he's buggered it up. We need to get rid of this guy, and we need the chance to try and get our country back on track. And I really hope we get a chance to do that. Thanks for the question.
Thanks, Eleanor. Yeah, look, as I mentioned in my opening comments, this is the issue that I'm running in this election to confront. It's guided all of my professional career in environmental law, as an advisor at the United Nations, negotiating food security, the impacts of climate change on food security. My partner's a refugee, and I know that they got provided with safe pathways to come here, and it appalls me that the major parties are fighting over who's more cruel to refugees when we are going to see tens of thousands of people subject to forced migrations in the not too distant future, tens of thousands. So what I want to say is that whether I'm in the parliament or not, this is my fight and I will not give it up. And I just want to say too that I think tripartisanship is incredibly important in the parliament. But where we can't reach it, we need leaders pushing the major parties and pushing the coalition to go further. We see consistently that climate change is ranked as the most important issue nationally, and especially right here in Macnamara. So I just don't think it's enough to play small target and sit back and wait until you're in government to come up with some climate leadership and to rally support behind you for those science-based reductions that we must get this decade if we're to avert the climate crisis. The clock's ticking, and I sure as hell do not want another coalition government. But I do not want a Labor government who is ill-equipped and unwilling to confront the fossil fuel industry and to phase out the coal and gas in time to confront the climate crisis. So we need leadership, we need true, robust positions that are public for people to see and engage with, and we need a solution. Because we're in an impasse, and neither of the major parties are taking us to where we need to be to protect our futures and those of generations to come. Thanks.
I'm going to be succinct response as well. Now, talking about the major parties, we've got a number of independents running across the country, and yes or no, does your party have a plan to collaborate with independents who are running on a climate platform should they be elected? Yes or no?
Yeah, of course. We want to work with anyone who will work with us on climate, and that's why we're so disappointed that Albanese is saying he won't work with us. Well, we've got constructive relationships in the ACT where the Greens have shared power with the Labor Party. We've got a climate minister there. We work coherently and productively together to get outcomes.
All right.
We see the LNP working together with the Liberal National Party. Why won't the Labor Party work with us to drive forward the solutions that we need?
That's a yes underlined in boldface. Josh, you get more than one word response as well.
You do keep trying to take our seats, but anyway, we'll put all that aside. I know. Anyway, moving on. It was a light-hearted thing. Moving on. If we don't win a majority of seats, the Governor-General will ask the Prime Minister to form government first. It's how it works. The Governor-General will always ask the Prime Minister of the day to form government. I want this community to have a voice to the government. I'm looking around the room, I've met with many of you over the last 3 years. I have spent my time as the member for Macnamara being a voice for our community. I want us to have a chance to have a voice to government, to push this country further, and of course, we'll see what the people of Australia decide. But we are committed to getting this done. We're asking for a mandate to try and govern our country, and I hope we get the opportunity.
Is that a yes?
Of course.
Okay, so yes. We're moving towards concluding comments, I can see now. So, I might, with respect, I also have a lot more questions that you'll be excited to know. You'll hear more questions from me. We have a lot more questions that I can see on the floor. But given the limited time that we have for the forum tonight, in respect to your time that you're giving to us, I'd like to now offer each of you what you were transitioning towards just there, which is the opportunity to provide a takeaway statement for 2 minutes to our audience. And I thank you to everyone who came with a question. As Steph went first at the beginning, Josh can speak first.
For anyone who wanted to ask me a question, I'll stick around long enough, so feel free to come and have a chat afterwards. Thank you to Steph for a good debate and for a robust discussion. Thank you all for coming to participate in a really important part of our democracy. I won't shy away from debating hard topics, and these are hard topics. We do have a lot of work to do. The Liberal Party didn't even bother to try and turn up tonight. They currently hold 77 seats in our federal parliament. We hold 68. We need a chance to make change in this country. I'm asking for an opportunity to continue representing our community and also be a part of our Labor government, to bring your voice to the Minister for the Environment, to the Prime Minister and to our country. I really want to be a part and leave a legacy. It's easy to say that this isn't big. What we're asking is a chance to do something that has literally never been done in our country's history. It is unprecedented. We have a huge body of work, and I really hope we get the chance to do it. It's a privilege. It is a privilege to represent our community. Whoever you choose in this election, I hope you give it some thought. I thank you for being here, and I hope we get a chance to make a better country for all of us. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Josh, and also, it's been a pleasure debating this evening. Macnamara, as I alluded to, is on a knife edge between Labor and the Greens. The Liberals cannot win this seat. So this seat isn't a matter of whether Labor forms government or not. It's a matter of whether we have independent and Green voices on the crossbench pushing, I hope, the next Labor government on the issues that we care about. And I know every single one of you here tonight cares about the climate crisis and cares about following the science, and the 97% of the scientific community saying the time for action is now. The time to phase out coal and gas is now. If Labor wins what will probably be another very close election, and particularly if they need to work with the crossbenchers to form government, having a Green MP in Macnamara will mean that you have got a voice representing this community, representing Australia and fighting for the climate targets that we need. Lovely guy, but cannot cross the floor to vote for the things he cares about. And I do believe he cares about climate change, and I do believe he cares about the environment and refugees. But he simply is not allowed under party rules to cross the floor on the issues that matter to his community and the issues that matter to us. So you have my commitment. As your Greens representative from Macnamara, I will work robustly with an Albanese government, and I will fight every single day in that parliament for science-based emissions and for the future of our young people. Because people like Alyssa deserve hope and they deserve a future. So please consider voting one Green, because if we vote the same way as we always have, we will not get the change we need to see. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Josh. Both of your dedications to this community is apparent well outside of the short time that we have together in this sort of forum. Sincerely thank you for that and what you give to our community. And I'll hand back at this point to our MC for our final closing remarks.
Thank you to the speakers, Professor Kathryn Bowen, Alyssa Seckinger-Crow, and to our moderator, April Seymour. We have a small gift in gratitude for each of you for your participation tonight. Thank you also to Josh Burns and to Steph Hodgins-May. Whatever your party differences, by coming and speaking tonight, you're continuing to keep public the climate emergency, so important to the citizens of Macnamara, into the election. It is the issue which many would like to cover over. Thank you also to the registration people, the ushers, the AV people, the organisers, the social media people, the flyer deliverers, all volunteers who have put time and effort to create this space of civic democracy. Thank you also to all of us Macnamara citizens for coming tonight, both in person and online, and taking up the opportunity to listen, speak and question the candidates. At the back of the hall, PECAN and Port Phillip Extinction Rebellion have tables. People there will be happy to talk to you about the work they do and how you might become involved or more involved in the climate activities they're engaged in. Finally, something might happen. Next week, May the 5th, at Macnamara Hall, there will be another candidates forum organised by Unchained St Kilda on election issues that have not been discussed tonight, although some have. All the major party candidates are expected to be there. You might like to email questions that link climate to the topics that will be discussed. Thanks again. We'll need to clean up in a little while and be out by 9. Have a good night.